Alright, today we're going to be doing a video on the Canon Rebel TI. Now, a fair warning, this is a film camera. This is not a digital SLR. This is not a DSLR. This is a film camera. This is an analog 35mm film camera. So if anyone was under the impression that this was a review of a digital camera, I have to tell you now that it's not. Now, with that said, this is the most DSLR-like film SLR that I've ever used from Canon. And I'll get on to what I mean by that a little bit later. Now, to start off, this camera is extremely cheap. I bought this on Amazon used for $25, 25 US dollars. Yes, I purchased this with a $25 Amazon gift card. It's that cheap. So if you were possibly interested in getting into DSLR photography, but you're turned off by the fact that the cheapest new DSLR you can get is $500 or something like that, you might want to pick up one of these. I mean, for so cheap, why not? With all that said, let's take a look at the back and see some of the features this has. Alright, so as you see, there is actually a screen on the back. Now, just at a first glance, most people would assume that because of that, this is a DSLR. Yes, the screen is very small, but if anyone has used something like Canon's 10D or something like that, there were a lot of screens that size a few years ago in DSLRs. So like I said, just looking at it, it's very easy to assume that it's a DSLR. Now, of course, the screen does not show the actual image you're going to see. You would need, of course, a digital SLR for that. So this is basically the same information you would see if you were to turn a DSLR on, look at the screen, and not go into live view. Now, button-wise, there is definitely a major difference from some of the buttons you'll find on a DSLR, but if you think about it, these are basically all buttons you could find on digital cameras. Now here you have your aperture value button, and I'll get to that in a minute. Here you have your function button, which kind of cycles through the menus a little bit. And here you have a button to light up the screen if you're in darker situations. Now, yet another thing that makes this very similar to a DSLR is the mode changer here. Now, as you'll notice, it basically has the same set of modes as just about any entry-level Canon DSLR. So for someone who needs to shoot automatically, this could make them feel a little bit more comfortable. Here you have the only dial on the camera. As I showed you before, there is an aperture value button because there is no dedicated aperture dial. So to change the aperture, you press the aperture value button and turn the dial. That's how you change the aperture. Turning the dial, of course, without the aperture button pressed will, of course, change the shutter speed and cycle through some of the functions. Here, of course, is your shutter button as well, which, like most entry-level DSLRs, kind of has that half press, not that more springy effect that you'd find from more higher-end SLRs. Now, on the top here, if you're not sure what this is, this changes the shooting modes. It can cycle between single, continuous, and self-timer. Now, you'd think these three are individual buttons, but the silver button in the middle is the only one you can actually press. Pressing it cycles through them. And of course, this also does have the standard hot shoe mount. Now on this, I have mounted the Nifty 50, the Canon 50mm f1.8 lens. Now since that's a very popular lens, hopefully that will be able to give you a size comparison to how big the camera is, because of course most people know the general size of the 50. Now I should point out that the best deals you're going to get on this camera by far are body only. They're not going to come with the kit lens, which I believe is a 28-90 or something along those lines. So since you're going to save so much money buying camera only without a lens, I'd recommend picking up this 50 because this is a very cheap lens and it's extremely sharp for the price range. I've done a review on that, so please check that out for more information. Now, despite being technically an entry-level camera, this is still a full 35mm, technically a full-frame camera. So if anyone's used to crop-sensor DSLRs, you can actually get the full-frame field of view with some of your lenses with this camera. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars on a 5D Mark III or whatever to necessarily get the most out of your lenses. Now, as someone who is used to the APS-C viewfinder, looking through this full 35mm viewfinder is absolutely fantastic. Now, one of the things I love about having such a better mirror is that I can actually look through the viewfinder and comfortably manually focus. Now, I personally don't have necessarily the best vision in the world, so in order to manually focus through the viewfinder of an APS-C camera, I often find I have to wear glasses, and so in most situations I end up having to autofocus. I personally prefer manual focus, so that definitely opens the door to that, which is very good. And of course, with this full-frame 35mm setup, a 50mm lens is actually a 50mm lens. Like I said, despite being $25, there's no more times 1.6 conversion. The 50 is a 50. Alright, so overall, this is one of the most DSLR-like film SLRs that I've really ever used. It has a screen on the back, a lot of the functions are the same, so if you're coming from a DSLR looking to try and film, this might be a very practical option because you're really not going to have to relearn anything. And on the other hand, if you're starting out with this, and you eventually want to get a DSLR, like I said, it would be a much smoother transition, because you really wouldn't have to learn a whole new user interface or whole new set of functions. Now also I should point out that in other regions this is known as the 300V. So if you're looking into buying one, depending on what region you're in, that's what you might want to look for.